What if intelligence isn't created inside the brain? What if thought, insight, and knowing don't start inside of us, but move through us? Physics already tells us that reality isn't local. Particles influence each other across distances. Information behaves in ways that ignore space and time. Yet when it comes to intelligence, we still act as though it's trapped inside the skull. This podcast exists because that assumption no longer holds. More and more, we're seeing that intelligence appears to be distributed, not contained. People are accessing information that they've never even been taught. So the question here is, what does that explain that our current models cannot? If you're curious about how intelligence can actually work in a future-centered society, you're in the right place. This is your introduction to non-local intelligence. And me, your podcast host, Rosie. So today I want to introduce the idea of non-local intelligence, and I want to be really clear from the beginning what I mean by that. So let me frame it properly. When I say non-local intelligence, I'm proposing it through the lens of channeling. The question that I'm posing through this podcast is, what if intelligence doesn't only come from local cognition? Meaning what the physical brain can generate from memory, sensation, input, and learned models. And what if channeling is one of the ways that we can investigate that question? Because whatever people think channeling is, psychological, spiritual, neurological, one thing is true. It creates a very specific kind of information event. Information comes through that the conscious mind was not deliberately composing. So the question becomes, where is that information coming from? Now, before I go on to my personal experiences, I want to anchor this in current science. So first of all, how do we currently define intelligence? Most modern models of intelligence are still basically brain-centered, cognition-centered. Information is stored, retrieved, recombined, computed. And I wouldn't say that that was wrong. I wouldn't say it's far off. Here's where I think we have to shift gears slightly, because a lot of mainstream cognitive science frames the brain as an inference engine, a prediction system, meaning your brain is constantly generating a model of reality, predicting what's happening, then updating based on error correction. Essentially, if you're crossing the road, you're predicting based on how fast the car is moving, who's in the environment, the weather, all of the sensory input. You're predicting what experience you're about to have. At the same time, what you're doing is you're correcting those predictions as you're going along. As things may occur differently to how you've predicted them, you are cognitively adjusting the model of what you're experiencing to align with what you're actually experiencing, right? So there's two things happening at the same time. One is predictive and one is corrective. So perception isn't just input. Perception is an active construction under constraints. And that's important because it already tells us something. Your experience of reality is not a direct feed. It's a kind of controlled simulation. Okay. Then when you move into consciousness studies, it gets more interesting because consciousness science still isn't settled. There are competing models. Some say consciousness is about global integration. Some say it's about informational structure. Some say it's more sensory-based and executive-based. We don't have a final answer. But what is generally agreed is consciousness and cognition are system-level phenomena. They're not located in one little intelligence box in the brain. They emerge from coordination across networks. So even mainstream science is pointing at something like this. Intelligence is organization, it's flow, it's integration. And that brings me to the next idea, the one that really matters for this whole non-local intelligence conversation. What if it's more accurate to think of the brain as a conductor? And I mean a conductor in the electrical sense, because the brain literally conducts electricity. Neural activity is electrochemical. Signal transmission is electrical. The brain is a dynamic electrical system. So if we use that as a metaphor, but also as a literal starting point, then intelligence becomes less about what you have stored and more about what your system can conduct, transmit, stabilize, and integrate. In other words, intelligence becomes state dependent. It becomes coherence dependent. It becomes a function of signal to noise. That alone explains something we've all experienced. You get your best insights when you're relaxed, walking, showering, drifting, creating, not when you're gripping the steering wheel of the mind trying to force an answer. So from a scientific lens, we could say certain brain states allow different kinds of integration, different access. And that's already normal, that's already accepted. But here's where my question begins. If intelligence is about access and integration, is all the information we can access generated locally inside the brain? Or could there be conditions where information becomes available to us that isn't fully explained by memory, immediate environment, and conscious reasoning? That's the non-local proposition. Now let's bring in channeling. Channeling, as I experience it, creates a really specific phenomenon. Information comes through that I don't understand. Sometimes it appears to reference complex systems, physics language, biology language, things that are not part of my training. And that's why channeling becomes a perfect lens for asking, is this just unconscious cognition doing something brilliant, or is it access to a broader informational field? Or is it a relational intelligence that isn't confined to the local mind? There are modes of knowing that don't feel like linear reasoning. And channeling to me is a structured, repeatable way to study that edge. So this podcast is me demonstrating a phenomenon, documenting it, dissecting it, and I'm really inviting inquiry, because if non-local intelligence is real, even partially, it changes how we understand learning, creativity, discovery, even scientific progress. And it also changes something else that matters deeply to me. It changes who gets to participate. Because if intelligence is not only stored knowledge, but access, then intelligence becomes about coherence, openness, discernment, nervous system regulation, and that's something we can train. So here's the working definition I want to offer. Non-local intelligence is the hypothesis that the human system can, under certain conditions, access usable information beyond the contents of the local physical mind. And channeling is the method I'm using to explore it. Not to prove it, not to convince you, but to investigate it, to ask better questions, to document patterns, to test what's useful, what's symbolic, what's verifiable, because the future honestly requires a more evolved intelligence than we currently are running on. And I'm not even talking about aliens, I'm talking about us. We need intelligence that includes empathy, systems thinking, holistic impact, and conscious participation. So if there's a chance that channeling is a doorway into a wider bandwidth of intelligence, then it's worth exploring with discipline. And that's what we're doing here. You know, I communicated with an extraterrestrial who was connected to Mars for about, I want to say he was around me for about 3 years, but he weirded me out a little bit. So I was a little bit apprehensive with the relationship, but he showed me a lot of things about how to work with energy and how to work with what you might call chi. I would say that's light plasma. And he showed me a lot of valuable techniques. And then he kind of passed me on to my new friends, the Syrian beings. And they said, we would like you to speak for us. And I said, okay, cool. I can do that if you want. And from there, the channeling developed. Now, I'd already practiced energy healing, mediumship, channeling visual material like symbols and things like that for a few years before, psychic ability, remote viewing. And when I got into the channeling, I realized that, all of those skills are required. They're like a precursor to being able to channel. And now I channel a being I call Dimitri. So the crazy thing about and this has become of interest to me since what I've started channeling. It's transformed from metaphysics to like future physics. I could describe it as future physics. I can't be sure about that because I don't actually know anything about physics. But the interesting thing about me is that I am a descendant. I'm the great granddaughter through my mother line of a famous civil engineer who was awarded Civil Engineer of the Century a few years ago. He engineered the Sydney Opera House, which was a groundbreaking piece of architecture for its time. He was knighted by the Queen. He has, a sculpture of his head in the National Portrait Gallery. Company
that he built is still a global civil engineering company, very successful, and still works on some of the biggest projects around. And they called him the philosopher engineer. And so what's interesting about that, and why I bring it up, not just to kind of be a gross name dropper, as my abilities began to emerge, when I realized that I could do mediumship, that I could speak to the dead, and I'll explain another time what I think is happening there. But when I realized I could speak to the dead, I said, you know what? I have the privilege of being connected to one of the most accomplished men in history, somebody who was a pioneer in engineering and architecture, somebody who furthered the development of his field. Now, these kind of people, they have something, and it's like when you look in history, you look at the Leonardo da Vinci, you look at Einstein, you look at, these people who seem to have access to an intelligence beyond the common population. And how did they know? How did they know? How did they know? How did they know this? How did they know how to do that? How did they know where did that information come from when the ordinary thinking of the time was completely different, that there was much less advanced? Where did it come from? And that became somewhat fascinating to me, in terms of thinking that actually I have an ancestor who is somebody who may represent that kind of persona in history, and clearly was pushing the boundaries of his field, which is physics, essentially. And how did he do that? How did he get that information? How did he become so successful? So I said to him, will you help me on my journey? Obviously, I'm not an engineer. I'm some kind of channel or psychic or whatever I am. I have this ability. Will you help me to become successful with it and show me how to create a successful business? And so I've been slowly, consistently working on my abilities whilst raising my young children. I've learned to channel in a way that I'm able to be distracted and drop back in. I'm quite adept at dropping in and out, which means that I'm able to ask him directly questions whilst I'm channeling. Generally, most channelers will share self-development work. They'll share kind of galactic information about different dimensions, or maybe about vibration, how to be happier, how to let go, how to have a greater awareness. It's very metaphysical, and I'm very comfortable channeling those kind of concepts because I have a master's in psychology, I have a master's in education. I understand human behavior quite well. So I'm very comfortable in that area, but he is taking me out of my comfort zone. What I'm recognizing is that what I'm channeling is physics, is at least through the language of physics. Sometimes biology, sometimes chemistry, sometimes it's like it's all converged together. And I feel like my great-grandfather is in there somewhere. Now, and in all honesty, that poses a question to me: what is happening when we channel? Am I just channeling a being? Was he channeling a being? And I'm also channeling that being? Were we connecting to a field of information? Do we genetically have a predisposition to connect to a certain kind of information? And that's coming through me now, because the more that I understood how information comes through to me, the more that I recognized in the stories that I'd heard about my great-grandfather and how he worked, that he was having the same experiences. He would wake up in the middle of the night and suddenly have what he called ideas. Now, to me, those are downloads, and I also have the same phenomenon happening. I wake up in the night sometimes, and I get a certain physical sensation when I'm channeling. It's almost like an energy trying to push through my energy field. And it's like a tension point that I feel physically, but outside of my body, which is quite strange. I wake up sometimes in the middle of the night and I feel that feeling. And it's like I'm channeling something in my sleep. During his meetings, he would draw these doodles all the time. And he even published a book called Doodles and Doggerel with his poems and the doodles So he valued creativity, and he used creativity to shift his brain state to allow the information to come in. Now, I know as somebody directly is shifting their brain state in order to receive information, who's working with their higher mind, who understands the kind of technicalities of how this works. I know what he was doing. He was distracting his left brain processes so that the inspiration from his right brain could come through during those meetings so that he could access his higher mind. Now, did he know that he was doing that directly, or did he just do it intuitively? I don't know. But the more that I understand how he worked, the more that I relate to how he worked, the more I question, how does this ability work? Where does it come from? Is there a genetic element here? And was he in contact with a higher intelligence? Is that higher intelligence the same intelligence that I'm in contact with? And really, I'm here just to ask questions, not to make definitions about what's happening. The reason I bring that through is what is unique about me is that I have that connection to somebody who was able to bring through an intelligence that was very ahead of its time, and it's documented. So I believe, I guess I believe what I'm saying is that I believe he was channeling. I believe that he channeled that idea, and he was able to engineer that idea through his channeling ability. And now I am channeling, and I have a lot of questions about how this works, what we're doing. If we can get people to understand that actually this is a way of living, that humans can live in this way, and actually ancient humans lived in this way, that they gathered intelligence from non-local consciousness and utilized it to evolve themselves at a much more rapid rate to understand concepts that their physical mind weren't able to grasp. Then I believe that we can advance ourselves and we can create a much more sustainable future. So my aim here really is to ask, what is non-local intelligence? How can we utilize it? I aim to demonstrate myself engaging in non-local intelligence, communicating with Dimitri and seeing what he brings through. And I will share my channelings with you so you can see what I'm talking about. All right. I'm getting that pain at the top of my head now. So I'm going to see today if Dimitri has something to say to us. Hi, Dimitri, do you want to come through? He says yes. We're discussing the principles of physics. We are challenging the boundaries of your understanding in terms of how you see the world, how you experience the world, in order to pose questions, in order to awaken you to a new possibility of understanding that is more aligned with the true state of consciousness that you are becoming at this time and human nature. This will support the understanding and the evolution of your scientific processes in terms of what you are capable of doing as humans, but additionally, the way in which you understand the many forces of nature and the constructs you have been given around the forces of nature. This is not to diminish the understanding that you already have and the templates that you are already working with. It is to simply evolve. As you evolve as humans, you do not diminish all of your previous knowledge and previous understanding and negate it as irrelevant. You build upon it. And so this is a building upon the existing frameworks. And as we build upon the existing frameworks in your common understanding, your collective understanding, there will be a need to reevaluate or reintegrate understandings within a new context in order for it to maintain itself into the new era of evolution for human nature. Again, we have explained to you that we are not here to influence you. We are not here to set a plan or a rule for how you conduct yourself. You are responsible for this. However, we are a body of information. You could consider us like an organic, dynamic library of information that is an aspect of your consciousness that you have the capacity to engage with. And as you seek to understand principles of your existence, then you may wish to search within the library of information that we hold in order to further your understanding of your reality. And so in terms of looking at your science and your scientific explorations are very important to us. And testing the boundaries of these scientific explorations is important to us, not only in the sense of what you seek to find out about what you see as external to yourselves within the atmosphere or within the earth, but to understand your relationship to it and how you are a contributing factor within this network of understanding the way in which you influence the outcomes that you experience within the scientific realms. It is interesting to note that you have distinguished in some areas that your influence on waveforms is very important, and yet your ability to apply that understanding to actually advance your awareness, advance your scientific knowledge is limited. We believe that this is an area that should be developed, that will enable science to evolve if it is open-minded enough to embrace new concepts and new ways of working. As you consider within an individual's life path, there might come a time where they are called to forget all that they know, let go of all that they know, let go of their rigid understandings, let go of their rigid ideas about certain philosophies or the way in which things must work, patterns that they've created within their lives. The same is true for collective archetypal representations, just like science, just like medicine, just like networks of thought, essentially. There comes a time when there has to be a collapse of the common understanding, and a new way of working must emerge. The point you are at in your human evolution determines collapse at a rapid rate. The rate at which you are moving through reality at the moment as humans is rapid. And so the representations of collapse and renewal within your reality will also be rapid. All right. So, Dimitri, do you have any guidance? What areas are we dealing with here? Electrodynamics is the basis through which you will begin to understand your new reality. So that's an important one, obviously. The symbiotic expression of all things. Think of it more in terms of systems thinking. We are expressing information that relates more readily to the entire system. We are interested in raising your understanding to the level at which you can understand the fundamental aspects of how all things work together in symbiosis. Since this is the framework through which you find your new understanding, and it remains relevant, whichever direction you choose to go in. We have mentioned to you the unified theory of all. We aim to challenge on a theoretical level how you interact with your reality. And we will do this in a metaphysical sense, and we will also do it through the possibilities of your science. You must understand the nature, the elemental nature of your reality, the nature of what you call forces, and how you are an aspect of those, the products of your reality experience. And so it is not enough to examine the mathematical components of your reality and understand them as external to yourself and to observe them as if you were the observer of your reality. It is not enough. You must integrate the understanding of now of how you created that to be. And this is not outside of many of your awareness for many of you, but the complexity through which you understand and measure this experience is outside of your awareness at present time. And it defines your experience of your reality, and it limits your experience of your reality in many ways. So in order to advance the population, in order to advance your understanding of how you create the reality experience that you are having, even down to the complex mathematical components of it, the observations of forces like gravity, etc., we would have you understand that you are the key component, and you can change the way in which you understand your reality, and it will change the way in which you interact with it as a population. You are very much interested in reverse engineering technology, extraterrestrial technology. You are very interested in understanding how these mechanisms work. And we say to you that you are the key component, not only in maneuvering this kind of technology, but also advancing your science to the degree that this technology can come into your presence, can come into your understanding. It is not just a process of continual observation. It is a process of raising your consciousness to the level where this technology has the capacity to come into your understanding. If you are not operating at the level of awareness that this technology exists within, you will never access it. You will always find a limitation that hinders your progression. Simultaneously, we say that as you engage with the notions of this technology being plausible, you raise your consciousness to the point where you actively engage in the willingness to raise your consciousness to the point where you can begin to understand this technology. So that's the goal, and that's what I'm calling non-local intelligence. And I actually believe in the future, many of us will be working in this way.